We play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and welcome to the next episode of Your Lore Questions Answered. Still working on the title there. If you have other ideas, go ahead and leave a comment below. I know I asked that in the last one, but I'm filming a bunch of these all in one afternoon, hence the same shirt and same background exactly. So you can kind of see where this little series will end off, and I'll have stopped and then record more. Anyways, this is the show where I simply answer your questions about the lore, not because I'm some sort of super expert, but because I love lore. So if I don't know the answer, I will do the research on it. This second question is also about Tyranids. Let's just face it, I love Tyranids, so maybe I'm a little biased towards those ones, or maybe it's a little easier for me to answer them because I have read a ton about Tyranids, because I love Tyranids. Tyranids are awesome. This one comes from Emerson Harris. Where did the Tyranids come from? Well, Emerson, the short answer is we really don't know. In fact, I would be surprised if anybody at Games Workshop actually knows. And I hope it's a question that never really gets answered, because I was a huge fan. Before Warhammer 40k, I was a huge fan of StarCraft, and my favorite species out of the three of them, the Zerg, Terran, Protoss, was the Zerg. I thought the Zerg were terrifyingly awesome, but I found that the way that they developed their lore made them less awesome. They made them more human. It's like they tried to humanize them so much that all of a sudden they weren't as terrifying, introducing how the Cerebrits worked exactly and how they infought each other. And then Kerrigan and StarCraft 2. I love the game StarCraft 2, but the lore just didn't go where I wanted to. I love the look of the Zerg, but I absolutely am in love with the lore of the Tyranids, including the Genestealer cults, which we'll talk about in a different video. So I just hope they don't try to explain it, because I think it would ruin it. But there are several theories that have come up, and some of these theories are because of old lore that has been retconned, and other are just because of little snippets we see here and there, and they're just totally made up. There's three I want to cover in this video. One is that they are a product of the old ones. Two is that they are actually being drawn in by the beacon of the Emperor, the astropath. And three is that they're just aliens. Aliens that evolved to consume, and they're just moving from galaxy to galaxy, and they really have nothing to do with Warhammer 40k. In fact, they are kind of the strangest race out of all the races in the galaxy, because there is a history to the galaxy, and every other species pretty much has a reason to exist. In fact, the originating parts of the galaxy, we had the old ones, which were one of the very first sentient races to appear in the galaxy, alongside some other ones like the Necrontyr and the Catan as well. And the old ones were very powerful, and they ended up designing a lot of the other races like the Eldar and the Orcs, and you could argue that maybe humans as well, but that one's iffy, and so on and so forth. And they've created a lot of the races that exist today, and now they are presumably extinct. And they created those races as a reason to combat something. For example, when the Necrontyr weren't happy with the old ones, they tried to fight them, but the old ones basically just swatted them aside because they weren't nearly powerful enough. So the Necrontyr made some agreements with the Catan, and they gave up all their souls, got their metal bodies, and then started their march against the old ones with the Catan's help. The old ones were finding themselves overwhelmed, so they created the Eldar, and then there was the Great War in Heaven between the Eldar and Necrons. We also know they created we don't know they created the Orcs. I should backtrack that a little bit there. So somebody's already commented saying, oh, we don't know that. I believe it actually said they did create them at one point, and then that was retconned. But we have pretty strong reasons to believe that they did create the Orcs. So there are some people that think that when the old ones lost and were destroyed, that they weren't all destroyed, that some of them actually were forced out of the galaxy or ran away from the galaxy. And that when they saw chaos basically come in and take over everything, and the Necrons go to sleep, and the chaos was happening because of the Eldar, which they had created, they realized they done messed up, and they needed to make something that would fix that. And of course, how do you fix something that you caused? Well, you caused something else that maybe it'll need to be fixed. It reminds me of a story when I was a kid. There was a mouse in a king's house. The King and the Mouse, I believe it was called. And so he gets cats, but then there's too many cats, and so he gets dogs, but there's too many dogs, so he gets lions, and there's too many lions, so he gets elephants, and there's too many elephants, so eventually he gets mice to chase away the elephants, and then he just lives with the mice because he realizes it wasn't so bad after all. Maybe the old ones should have just been nice to the Necrontyr, and they wouldn't have got screwed over so badly, but, you know, bygones are bygones. So some people think that the old ones, or an old one, or who else, created the Tyranids. Now, we actually have some evidence for this. This evidence more comes because the Tyranids don't really make any sense. Like, if you looked at it from a pure science point of view, the amount of energy that the Tyranids would expend to get to a planet doesn't really get made up for by all the stuff they consume on the planet. Like, we can talk about whether they can possibly consume everything on the planet or not. We don't really have to debate that. The question is it an efficient method for survival? For example, the bioforms that they send down, they create hormigants and termagants and ripper swarms and gargoyles, and they send them down there, and they're carrying their guns and their claws and all that kind of stuff, and they go in and they fight. But all they had to really do was create swarms of tiny creatures, and those tiny creatures could go through, and you'd have to, a flamethrower could take care of them, but pretty much every other weapon that you have at your disposal would be pretty useless against them, and they could use them to take over. So there's just, anybody who knows anything about science could probably come up with 100 better ways for the Tyranids to do what they're supposed to be doing. And so now there's two possible explanations for that. One is that they did not evolve, but were created, and so have the maybe on purpose or by accident these problems. The second is that when Games Workshop was creating the lore for them, they just kind of made something that sounded cool, and it didn't have to make sense. That's probably more likely the answer. But like we're not going to talk about that one. We're going to talk about how it's most likely that they did not evolve. There's a lot, just the way they operate acts more like some way that they've been created. And just the fact that they're just not super efficient for what they do. The amount of energy lost will rarely be the amount of energy consumed. Now, they could make up for that. There are countless worlds in the galaxy, and I'm sure for every world that puts up a good enough fight to give the Tyranids a problem with their attrition, there's probably another 15, 20, 50, 100 worlds that they could consume rather easily with very little effort, in which case maybe that does make up for that, and in which case we could argue that they evolved this way. But still, when you look at them, do they look evolved? They don't really look evolved. Why would you evolve to be holding a gun? Why would you evolve to have to redigest everything? Because every time you redigest and recreate, you're always expending energy. Even if you're doing it as efficiently as possible, the law of thermodynamics states that you're going to keep losing energy, which is obviously why they need to keep consuming galaxies. Now, it's if you think of it, the best evolutionary pathway would be to go into a galaxy, and instead of consuming it, defeating it, killing any higher level organisms, and then farming it from then on. But then we would never have seen the Tyranids. So arguing that that would be an evolutionary pathway is possible. That back in some other galaxy, that was an evolutionary pathway. Like in the theory of evolution, nature likes to find its niches and fill them in. And so it's like you look at certain things in our planet, and it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why didn't they just do that? And the answer to that question is because something else already did. So we could argue that they evolved by saying, well, yeah, it looks ridiculous, but the ones that aren't ridiculous are the ones that would stay back at home, and you would never have seen them, so you wouldn't have anything to compare to. Only the ones that would make it over here are the ones that are ridiculous and do require to consume the entire galaxy, and do so very inefficiently, which is why they have to go to the next galaxy rather than just staying back and soaking in the billion stars that could provide so much energy. If all they do is develop an organism that could do solar power, like if that happened, they're already in another galaxy, just sitting there for the next billions of years, just basking in the rays of those suns and soaking up the black holes that are in there. So I guess my argument ended up defending the fact that they could be totally evolved, which brings me to the second idea, which was the last one on my list, but we're going to go to second. What that they are just totally alien, and that they have evolved to be the way they are. Now, what are our proof of the evolution of the Tyranids rather than them being a tool or a weapon that's been created? I think the main theory, or the main reason why this theory sticks the best and why it's my favorite, is because watch how they have acted since they have entered the galaxy. Back in the early days of the High Fleet Behemoth, which is one of the earliest recorded, but not the earliest. There might be ones as early as the 36th millennium. And of course, we have the Genes to their cult, which seems to have been around forever. And they are, as we now know, the vanguard of the Tyranid fleet. or at least that's what we suppose, unless it's just some other malicious thing happening. That we have the Hive Fleet entering, and they are strong at first, but they get repelled and they get broken up into splinter fleets. But then those splinter fleets start to adapt very unique qualities, and that's so much that you can look at a splinter fleet and be like, it's developed this quality. Like if it was perfectly evolved already, it would already have all these different qualities from consuming countless galaxies before it. But as it comes across new threats, all of a sudden new qualities are evolved to adapt against that. So that shows that rapid evolution that they're able to do against their foe, whether it is in the case of Hive Fleet Leviathan, which instead of just coming in the eastern fringe, and the galaxy, if you look at it, is flat and like this, and you had the behemoth coming in like this and encountering all the problems. Leviathan comes in like tendrils, so it can poke in at all sorts of different areas that you're not ready for. You have Hive Fleet Kronos, which has adapted to be able to actually go after chaos, which is strange that when it entered the galaxy, it didn't already have that adaptation besides the Shadow and the Warp, to show that maybe all the other galaxies that it was part of, chaos wasn't as big a problem, even though I believe that the Immaterium is probably omnipresent throughout the entire universe in the 40k universe. It's possible that the other galaxies don't have psychic races who disturb it and make it into the realm of chaos that it is. And so in that case, the evolution makes sense because we're witnessing it as it's in there, rapidly evolving, quite rapidly evolving to adapt to everything that's happening, even chaos itself. I know that could still give it evidence that it's been created, but if it was created, the old ones already knew the threat, and so they could have had that all pre-built in. Because the Shadow and the Warp proved not to be powerful enough. Like there were still fights between demons and Tyranids side by side. So obviously the Shadow and the Warp doesn't just blot out all the demons around it. It makes it harder for them to exist in the material world, but it doesn't make it impossible. Hive Fleet Kronos makes it nearly impossible. So why wouldn't they have built that in to begin with? Now, that's not to say that it wasn't built by some other alien race, maybe for some other problem in their galaxy, and then it just kind of went out of control. We don't really know that, or maybe it was designed by maybe there is some sort of creator in the back who's actually controlling everything. I really hope that's not the case. I hope it is just this incomprehensible, huge alien intelligence. I'm not sure. But that's my argument for why it's probably not created, and it probably has evolved from something. Now, the last part is not really a different origin story, more as a question about why is it here in our galaxy. You have to understand, galaxies are really, really far apart. If you think the distance between two stars is far, and it is, the distance between two galaxies is enormous. It is mind-bogglingly, it's far. It's really far. As they say in Hitchhiker's Galaxy, or Guide to the Galaxy, space is really big. It is. It's enormous. It is so big that it's just hard to fathom traveling between galaxies unless you have some sort of faster than light drive or some jump drive that lets you to bend space. Who knows? Tyranids don't appear to have a lot of those different capabilities, so they must have slowly drifted over here, which would take millions of years. It would actually take millions of years to get here. So the question is, why did they come here? Now, this last one I think can be quashed pretty quickly because of what I just said, unless you combine it with some other ideas. And that is that the light of the Astronomicon is actually designed by the Emperor to bring the Tyranids here to fight chaos. I've heard that one before, and I just want to talk about it because it seems interesting, kind of like a big light that all the mosquitoes come into, a fly trap or an insect trap of sorts. But there's a couple huge problems to that. One, the Astronomicon's only been around for the past 10,000 years. And as we've already said, the distance between galaxies is so vast that if you're going to be able to cross them within 10,000 years, that you've got to be going pretty darn fast. And the Tyranids have not shown that capability of speed while they've been inside the galaxy. Maybe there's a different method of transportation between galaxies. Maybe the gravity of the galaxy makes whatever they used coming across impossible to use locally. Kind of like a lot of sci-fi will let you use hyperspace and jump drive as long as you stay far enough away from planets, and then you got to use a more conventional drive. I don't know. But the idea that just 10,000 years ago it drew them in seems unlikely, unless they were already pretty close to our galaxy and then that just kind of attracted them. It's quite possible that it does attract them and that they are trying to get to Earth because of that. But I doubt it. I really doubt that one, out of all of them, is the least likely in my mind. So for me, if I were to rank the likelihood of each of these theories being true, the most likely in my mind was just a species somewhere in some galaxy, because there are so many galaxies out there that this is quite possible to happen, that evolved to be just like the Tyranids, to fill the niche of intergalactic conquest, not the ones that stick around and farm, because then they would just lose that. Maybe we'd actually find that once they've conquered enough of the galaxy that there would be a certain splinter then that would actually stay behind and farm, because really look at the number of worlds that they've destroyed. It is not a huge amount compared to how many worlds there are in the galaxy. And then number 2 out of all that would be that they were a creation. That's an easier one to look at in some ways, although I still put the evolution as number 1 because it's my favorite. The creation makes the most sense because they don't make much sense, which means they were probably created by somebody who knew what they were doing but built in fail-safes to make them not good, or just, can only do so well when they make an entire species of creatures. Also, the one that makes that number 2 as well is if you're going to create something like that, why make them so diverse and their biology? Why not just have a few creatures just multiplied, kind of like the flood from Halo? It's much simpler. It's just like one creature multiplied, and that becomes a threat. I don't know. I know it's all just science fiction. It's all made up, so there's going to be holes in the theories of all this because the writers themselves are just kind of making stuff up as they go along, and that's perfectly fine. It makes for good, fun talk. What do you think? Where do you think the Tyranids come from? Leave a comment below, and leave a comment below the questions that you'd like me to answer in a future episode of Your Lore Questions Answered. Thanks so much for watching. Happy wargaming.